"Mister, please hide me in your war shirt," she begged. The lone Cherokee reached for his blade. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The sun was beginning its descent beyond the mountains, casting long shadows over the quiet woods of the Cherokee Nation. The air was crisp, but the evening's calm was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. A woman, breathless and desperate, stumbled into the clearing, her heart racing. She was no longer just running. She was fighting for her very life. Her clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with dirt and fear. She looked over her shoulder, knowing the men were closing in. They had been hunting her for days, and it seemed there was no escape. As she stumbled further into the woods, she saw him, the man who could save her. He stood tall and silent, his dark eyes like the night itself, watching her approach with a mixture of caution and curiosity. He was alone, wearing the traditional war shirt of his people, a piece of clothing that symbolized strength and honor. His long hair was tied back, and his face was etched with the wisdom and scars of countless battles fought and survived. The woman fell to her knees in front of him, her voice trembling as she begged, "Mister, please hide me in your war shirt. I don't want to die." The Cherokee warrior remained still for a moment, his gaze never leaving her. He could sense her fear, and yet he also felt something else, something deeper. He reached for the blade at his side, its polished steel gleaming in the fading light. The woman's eyes widened in both fear and relief. She had no idea what he was going to do, but she knew that in this moment, he was her only chance. He studied her, reading the fear in her eyes and the desperation that clung to every inch of her being. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. "You have nothing to fear, if you trust me." Without another word, he moved with the grace of a panther, grabbing her arm gently but firmly and pulling her into the cover of the dense forest. The sound of approaching riders echoed through the trees. They were close, too close. He quickly led her to a hidden ravine, the sound of their footsteps drowned by the rustling leaves. As they crouched in the shadows, the Cherokee warrior looked at her with a piercing gaze, silently telling her to remain quiet. The men passed by, unaware of the two figures hidden just a few yards away. The woman's heart was still pounding in her chest, but she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. She had been saved, at least for now. As the sounds of the riders faded, the warrior relaxed slightly, but remained on high alert. He didn't trust them to give up so easily. The woman, still on her knees, looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you help me?" she asked. The warrior didn't immediately answer. Instead, he studied her with the same intensity he had earlier, as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with an ancient wisdom. "Because you're not the first person to need saving," he said. "And you won't be the last." He extended a hand to help her up, and she took it without hesitation, still in shock from the turn of events. She had been saved by a stranger, a warrior who had risked his life to protect her, without knowing her past or her story. But something told her that this was not just a chance encounter. It was fate. The Cherokee warrior's actions spoke louder than words. He was a protector, a man bound by honor and duty, willing to stand against the odds to defend the innocent. She realized then that her life was no longer hers to control. It now belonged to this warrior, and to the fate that had brought them together. But little did she know, the danger was far from over. The night was still young, and the hunters were still out there. They would not stop until they had claimed their prey. And now, they had an even greater reason to hunt her down. The warrior's eyes narrowed as he looked into the distance, sensing that the worst was yet to come. But for the moment, they were safe. And that was all that mattered. The Cherokee warrior helped the woman to her feet, his grip strong and steady. The shadows of the night deepened around them, and the sounds of the wilderness seemed to grow louder in the silence. The danger was still very real, but for the moment, they were safe. The warrior's eyes scanned the surrounding trees, his sharp senses alert for any sign of movement. The woman, still breathless from the frantic chase, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm as she stood beside him. She had been saved, but she had no idea how long that safety would last. The warrior turned to her, his face stoic, yet his gaze held a warmth that was not present before. "We cannot stay here long," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They will not give up so easily." She nodded, still shaken. She had barely escaped death at the hands of those ruthless men, and now she was at the mercy of a stranger, someone she knew nothing about. Yet, she felt no fear in his presence. There was something about him, an unspoken strength, that made her believe he would keep her safe. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace around them. The warrior did not answer immediately. Instead, he began to lead her through the dense woods, his movements fluid and purposeful. She followed closely, trying to match his pace, but it was clear that he was far more at home in the wild than she was. As they moved deeper into the forest, the woman noticed how the warrior's steps seemed to blend with the surroundings. He walked with the ease of someone who knew this land like the back of his hand, each step calculated, each motion deliberate. She could see the faint outline of a path ahead, one that was well hidden from view. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the rustling of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional chirp of a night bird. The woman's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of everything. Who was this warrior? Why had he helped her? She had no answers, but she felt a sense of gratitude towards him that she couldn't explain. He had risked his life to save hers, a stranger who had no obligation to do so. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. The warrior stopped and turned to her. "We will rest here for the night," he said. "It is not safe to travel further tonight." She nodded, her legs sore from the long walk, and sank to the ground beside a fallen log. The warrior did not sit, but instead began to gather wood for a fire. He worked quickly and efficiently, his hands moving with practiced ease. The woman watched him, her curiosity growing. There was something about him that was both familiar and foreign, as though she had seen him before in some other life, some other place. The fire was soon crackling, its warmth offering a small comfort against the cold night air. The woman sat close to it, feeling the heat on her skin. Her eyes wandered to the warrior, who was still standing, his posture tense, as though he was waiting for something. "Are you going to tell me your name?" she asked, breaking the silence. The warrior turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, slowly he spoke. "My name is Dakota," he said. "I am a member of the Cherokee Nation." The woman nodded, trying to digest the name. Dakota. It had a strong sound to it, like the mountains themselves. She wanted to ask him more, but something told her that now was not the time. She remained silent, her thoughts drifting. As the fire crackled, the warrior began to speak again, his voice low. "You are safe here, but not for long. They will follow you, and when they find us, they will not be merciful." The woman felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this, but hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. She was in danger, and so was he. "What will we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dakota did not answer immediately. He stood, his eyes scanning the perimeter, as though searching for any sign of the men who might be out there. "We will fight if we must," he said finally, his voice cold and resolute. "But we must be smart. We cannot face them head on. We need to outsmart them." The woman nodded, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the situation. She had never imagined that her life would lead her here, to this dark forest, relying on a stranger for survival. She had never asked for this. But now, there was no turning back. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. Dakota did not acknowledge her words, his focus remaining on the task at hand. But for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something soft. "Rest," he said, his voice still calm. "We have a long road ahead of us." The woman leaned back against the log, feeling the weariness of her body catch up with her. She closed her eyes, the crackling of the fire lulling her into a light sleep. But even in her dreams, she could not escape the sense of danger that lingered in the air. The hunters were out there, and they would not stop until they had found her. And the warrior, Dakota, would not stop either, not until he had kept his promise to protect her. As the night stretched on, she drifted in and out of sleep, the firelight flickering in her mind's eye, and the sound of the forest wrapping her in an uneasy calm. The night had passed quietly, the fire still crackling softly in the clearing, but the air felt different now. The weight of the danger was real, pressing down on them both. Dakota had remained vigilant, watching the surrounding woods with eyes that never seemed to blink, his body coiled like a spring. The woman, whose name she had not yet shared, stirred slowly awake as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the trees. The light was soft at first, casting long, delicate shadows on the forest floor, but it wouldn't be long before the day would be in full bloom. She sat up, feeling the weariness in her bones. Her muscles ached from the flight and the long hours spent in the forest, but there was something else too, a deep sense of uncertainty. Dakota was already preparing to move. He was methodical in his actions, as if this was just another day in the wild. He was packing his things, checking his bow and arrows, and securing his blade. His movements were precise, purposeful. She knew then that this wasn't just a man trying to help her. This was a warrior, and his life had always been one of survival, of strength, of knowing what to do when the world came crashing down. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had simply been running from men who wanted her dead. But now, this warrior was her lifeline. "What will we do now?" she asked, the words feeling weak in her mouth. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "We move," he said, the tone of his voice carrying a weight that she couldn't ignore. "They will come looking for you soon, and when they do, we must be ready." "But where will we go?" she pressed, her mind racing. Dakota paused, his eyes scanning the trees once more. "There is a place, far from here," he said. "A sacred place. It's hidden from those who would harm you. We can stay there until it's safe. And what if they find us?" Her voice was trembling now, but she couldn't stop herself. The fear was still there, gnawing at her, deep in her chest. Dakota's face softened, just for a moment. He walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "They will not find us," he said firmly. "And if they do, I will protect you." There was something in the way he said it, something in his voice that made her believe him. It wasn't just bravado. He truly believed it. She nodded slowly, taking in his words, feeling the weight of them settle inside her. It was strange, but for the first time since the chase began, she felt like there was a chance, like maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. Dakota led her through the woods, moving swiftly and silently, like a shadow in the trees. His every step was calculated, his every action deliberate. She followed as best she could, though her body was exhausted and sore. The forest seemed to close in around them, the towering trees whispering in the wind. She wondered where this sacred place was, how far they would have to travel to escape the men who sought her. As they walked, Dakota spoke little, but when he did, his words were always calm and steady. He told her about his people, the Cherokee, about the land they once ruled, and about the traditions that shaped him into the man he was today. "Our people," he said quietly, "were warriors, but we were also protectors. We fought not for conquest, but to preserve our way of life." The woman listened, feeling the weight of his words. She knew little of his people, but she could tell they were proud, strong, and deeply connected to the land. The thought of being protected by someone like him brought her a strange sense of peace. They continued their journey in silence, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of branches. The forest seemed endless, but Dakota seemed to know every path, every turn. She could tell he had been here before, many times. Finally, after hours of walking, they reached a small stream. The water was clear and cool, and Dakota paused for a moment to drink, crouching down beside the bank. The woman followed his lead, kneeling beside him and drinking deeply from the stream. She felt the coolness of the water refresh her body, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax. But the moment didn't last long. Dakota's eyes narrowed, and he stood abruptly, signaling for her to do the same. "We must keep moving," he said. "The hunters are close." She felt her heart race again, the fear creeping back into her veins. They had no time to waste. Dakota turned and led her along the stream, moving faster now. The woman followed, pushing her tired body to keep up. As they moved, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they ever be safe? Would Dakota really be able to protect her from the men who wanted her dead? She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. She was no longer running alone. And that, in itself, was a kind of hope. As they continued to move through the forest, She knew the real battle was just beginning. The sun had risen higher in the sky, and the once peaceful forest now felt oppressive with its silence. Dakota moved with purpose, his eyes sharp and alert. He had known this land for years, but today it felt different. The weight of the situation bore down on him. The woman's safety now his responsibility, and he would not fail her. They had been walking for hours, and her exhaustion was beginning to show. She stumbled slightly, her legs aching from the constant movement. Dakota glanced back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softened just a little. He knew she could not keep this pace for much longer. They had to find shelter soon. He motioned for her to stop. "We will rest here for a while," he said quietly, his voice steady. She nodded gratefully, collapsing onto a nearby rock. Her body was weary, and her mind was racing. She had never been in such a situation before. She had always led a simple life, one that involved little more than working on the farm, taking care of the house, and occasionally helping out in the town. But now, her entire world had been turned upside down. She had no choice but to rely on a man she barely knew, a man who had promised to protect her, yet remained a mystery. Dakota stood a little further away, scanning the trees and the ground with a warrior's focus. The woman couldn't help but watch him. His calm demeanor, the way he seemed to know exactly what to do, how to move, how to prepare, it was all so foreign to her, yet comforting. She had never met anyone like him. "How long will we stay here?" she asked, breaking the silence. Dakota didn't turn to face her immediately. Instead, he bent down, carefully checking his weapons and tightening the straps on his gear. "Not long," he said, his voice low but firm. "We cannot stay in one place too long. The hunters will be searching for us. But for now, we rest." She nodded, still unsure of what to make of everything. The world she had known before seemed like a distant memory, and the woman who had lived it was someone she could barely recognize. She had no family left, and no place to return to. It was a strange feeling, freedom, but at a price. She was safe for now, but how long would it last? Dakota had told her the hunters would not stop until they found her. He was right. She could hear the sound of their voices in her head, feel the heat of their pursuit like a shadow following her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block it out. When she opened them again, Dakota was still watching the surrounding woods, but his posture had shifted slightly. He was no longer just a protector. Now, he seemed to be waiting. She was about to ask what he had heard when he raised a hand, signaling for silence. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately stood, her senses heightened. Dakota was already moving, his steps quick but silent, guiding her toward a nearby cluster of trees. The woman followed, her breath shallow with the sudden rush of fear. Dakota led her into a small hollow, hidden from view by thick brush and low-hanging branches. They crouched down, the forest around them suddenly alive with sound. Dakota's eyes narrowed as he peered out from the shelter, his focus intense. The woman could feel the tension in the air, a sense of impending danger. She held her breath, listening intently, but all she could hear were the rustling leaves and the occasional distant bird call. Then, she heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching the forest floor. Dakota's hand was on her arm, his grip tight as he pulled her closer. She was pressed against him now, his body warm and solid. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, and despite the fear that gripped her, she felt a strange sense of calm. This man, this warrior, was her protector, and in this moment, she believed he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The footsteps grew louder, and she could hear the voices of the hunters, but they didn't sound as close as she had feared. Dakota motioned for her to stay still, and she obeyed without question. She couldn't even bring herself to look out from their hiding place. She trusted Dakota completely. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The hunters moved past, their voices drifting further away. Dakota slowly relaxed, his hand still resting on her arm. When he was certain the coast was clear, he signaled for her to follow again. They rose from their hiding place and moved deeper into the woods, but this time with more urgency. Dakota had not yet said a word, but the woman could tell he was on high alert, his senses stretched to their limits. They walked for another hour, the sun now high above them, and the forest seemed to grow darker, the trees closing in around them. Dakota stopped once more, turning to face her. "We are not safe yet," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "But we will be soon." The path ahead is hidden, and if we stay on it, we will lose them. The woman nodded, her heart still racing. Where are we going? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dakota did not answer immediately, but his eyes softened slightly. To safety, he said, and to the place where you can be free. For the first time in what felt like days, she allowed herself to believe in that promise. She followed him without question, knowing that wherever he was taking her, it would be the only place where she could find peace. And perhaps, in time, freedom. They had been traveling for what felt like days, though the sun had barely moved across the sky. Dakota's pace was unyielding, and the woman, though exhausted, kept up with him. Each step through the dense forest felt like a test of her endurance, but she pushed forward, driven by the sense of safety that Dakota had promised her. The further they traveled, the more the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees growing thicker, the underbrush more tangled. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Dakota moved through it all with ease, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He had not spoken much since they had left the clearing where they had hidden from the hunters, but the woman could feel his presence like a shield. He was always looking ahead, always on alert, and yet, she knew he was never far from her side. They reached a small creek, its water running clear and cool. Dakota stopped here, crouching down by the edge of the water, his face still serious. He took a moment to drink, his hand steady as he cupped the water in his palm. The woman watched him, the way he moved so naturally with the land, like he had been born to it. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also a growing awareness that, despite his strength and skill, they were both still vulnerable. The hunters were still out there, and they were not far behind. Dakota looked up, meeting her gaze, his expression unreadable. We are close now, he said quietly. The place I've promised you, it is not far. But we must be careful. The path is hidden, and not many know of it. We will rest here, but only briefly. She nodded, her breath catching slightly as she took in his words. There was a finality to his tone, something that told her they were nearing the end of this part of their journey. The woman had been unsure of where they were going, but now, she could almost feel it, the place where she might finally find safety. Dakota rose to his feet, his movements fluid, almost effortless. He began to make a small fire, the crackling sound of the flames breaking the silence of the forest. The woman sat down on a nearby log, watching him work. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the warmth of a fire until now. The chill in the air had been biting, and the cold had sunk deep into her bones. As Dakota added more wood to the fire, the woman found herself lost in thought. She thought of her life before all of this, before the hunters, before she had been forced to flee. She had been content, living a quiet life on a small farm. But everything had changed in an instant, and now, her survival depended on a man she barely knew. Dakota finished with the fire and sat down beside her, his back against a tree. He was silent for a long moment, as though weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. You are safe here, but not forever, he said. The men who are chasing you, they will not stop. But we will find a way to outsmart them. She looked at him, her heart racing once more. She knew he was right. The hunters wouldn't give up easily. They had been relentless in their pursuit, and the longer they stayed in the wild, the more dangerous it became. How do you know they won't catch us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dakota's eyes met hers, his gaze steady. Because I know how they think, he said. And I know how to hide. His words held a certain weight, as if he had lived through this before, as if he had faced enemies who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The woman couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for him. He was not just a warrior, he was a protector. And for the first time since the chase began, she allowed herself to feel a sliver of hope. Dakota had given her a promise, and in that promise, she found a glimmer of safety. She leaned back against the tree, her eyes closing for a moment as the warmth of the fire began to soothe her aching body. The forest around them was alive with sounds, but in this small circle of light, she felt a sense of peace. It was brief, fleeting, but it was enough. The fire crackled, and the woman's thoughts drifted. She could hear the wind rustling in the trees, the faint call of a distant bird, and the rhythmic beat of Dakota's steady breathing beside her. The quiet was almost too much to bear. She longed for the chaos to end, for the fear to subside, but deep down, she knew that the only way to survive was to keep moving. The hunters were still out there, and as much as she trusted Dakota, she couldn't help but wonder how long they could outrun them. Dakota shifted beside her, his hand brushing against hers briefly. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "We leave at first light," he said. "We move quickly, and we do not stop until we are safe." She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. There was no time to waste, no time to rest for long. As the fire flickered and the night deepened around them, she knew that the journey was far from over, and the path ahead would be even more dangerous than the one they had already traveled. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when Dakota stood, his movements smooth and deliberate. The fire they had built the night before was now just smoldering embers, casting faint shadows in the early morning mist. The woman, still half-dazed from a restless sleep, stirred as she heard him move. The air was crisp, and the chill of the night still lingered in her bones. She sat up slowly, wiping the sleep from her eyes, her thoughts clouded with both gratitude and uncertainty. Dakota was already gathering his belongings, preparing for the next leg of their journey. He worked with quiet precision, his every action deliberate, as if the world depended on it. She knew it did. They couldn't stay in one place for long. The hunters were still out there, and they wouldn't give up easily. As Dakota tightened his gear and checked his weapons, the woman couldn't help but watch him. There was something about him, his calm demeanor, his strength, that reassured her, even in the face of the danger that still loomed. He was her protector now, but what if even he couldn't keep her safe? What if the hunters found them? The thought gnawed at her as she stood and began to pack her own things. She had never been a fighter, never been trained to survive in the wilderness. But somehow, in the past days, she had found a strength she never knew she had. It was a strength she now needed to hold on to if she was going to survive. Dakota glanced at her once as she finished packing, his expression unreadable but steady. Without a word, he motioned for her to follow, and she did without hesitation. They moved quickly, Dakota leading the way through the trees with practiced ease. The woman struggled to keep up, her legs sore from the constant walking, but she did not complain. She could feel the urgency in the way he moved. They had to keep moving if they were going to stay ahead of the hunters. As they walked, the woman's mind wandered. She thought of the past, of the life she had left behind. She had never imagined it would come to this, fleeing for her life through the wilderness with a stranger as her only protector. And yet, here she was. She thought of her family, of the simple life they had lived. They had worked the land, tended to the animals, and lived in peace. But that peace had been shattered in an instant. It felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, as much as she longed to return to that life, she knew it was no longer possible. She had crossed a line. The hunters wouldn't let her go back. She wasn't sure where they were going now, but it didn't matter. What mattered was staying alive. Dakota stopped suddenly, his body tensing as he looked ahead. The woman froze, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know what he had heard, but she knew it was something dangerous. Dakota crouched low, motioning for her to do the same. The woman obeyed, her heart pounding as she followed him behind a thick tree trunk. They waited in silence, the tension hanging in the air. Dakota's eyes scanned the woods, his sharp senses alert for any sign of danger. The woman could hear the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, but nothing else. Then, faintly, she heard something. Footsteps, crunching the dry leaves beneath them. Her heart skipped a beat. The hunters were close. Dakota signaled for her to stay still, and she did, holding her breath as she waited. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The woman could hear the hunters' voices now, low and gruff. They were searching for her. The woman clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Dakota was right. The hunters wouldn't stop. They were relentless, and they wouldn't rest until they found her. She could feel the fear rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She couldn't let it control her. Dakota was beside her, his presence a calming force in the midst of her panic. He was calm, focused. He had faced danger before. He could handle this. The footsteps continued, and Dakota remained motionless, his body still as stone. The woman barely dared to breathe, her heart thudding in her chest. She could hear the hunters now, just on the other side of the tree. They were close. Too close. Then, they stopped. The woman's heart skipped a beat. Dakota didn't move, but the woman could see the muscles in his body tense, ready for whatever would come next. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and then, slowly, Takota motioned for her to move. They slipped away from their hiding place, moving silently through the woods. The woman's feet were heavy, but she forced herself to keep up. Takota was always ahead, guiding her through the trees, his focus unwavering. They continued in silence, the woman's mind racing with fear. Would they be able to outrun the hunters? Would they ever find a place where they could truly be safe? Takota's words echoed in her mind. He had promised her safety. He had promised to protect her. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running, but she knew one thing for sure. As long as Takota was with her, she would fight to survive. They had to. There was no other choice. The journey had become grueling. Takota and the woman had been moving steadily for hours, the forest seeming to stretch endlessly before them. Despite the urgency, the woman had begun to notice the subtler beauty of the land around her. The way the light flickered through the trees, the crisp air, the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. But even in this brief peace, there was a constant weight on her shoulders. The hunters were still out there, and no matter how far they traveled, they would not be safe until they found a true sanctuary. Takota seemed to be aware of this, his every movement sharp, his eyes never lingering on the scenery. He was scanning, listening, and feeling for any signs that the men who hunted her were near. The woman felt both gratitude and a gnawing sense of dread. Takota's protection was all she had, but she couldn't shake the thought that it might not be enough. As they traveled deeper into the forest, the path grew narrower and more treacherous. The underbrush was thick with tangled roots and brambles, making it hard to move quickly. The woman's feet ached, her legs burning from the constant strain, but she kept moving, her determination fueling her. They reached a small stream, its water clear and cold, but Takota didn't stop to drink. Instead, he crouched down by the water's edge, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. The woman, still struggling to catch her breath, sat down on a rock nearby, her mind spinning with the weight of everything. She had no idea where they were going, but Takota had spoken of a hidden place, a sanctuary far from their pursuers. It had become her one hope, the only thing keeping her going. Takota stood up and looked at her, his expression as stoic as ever. "We cannot stay long," he said. "We move again in the morning. We must be ready." The woman nodded, though a part of her wanted nothing more than to rest, to stop running. But she knew they couldn't afford that luxury. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped, and Takota built a small fire. He worked with efficiency, the crackling of the flames the only sound breaking the silence of the forest. The woman watched him for a moment before turning her attention to the night sky, her thoughts clouded with worry. "How much farther is it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Takota paused for a moment, as though considering her question. "Not far," he said, "but we must be careful. The hunters will have caught our scent by now. They know we are close." Her heart sank at his words. She had hoped they would be able to get far enough ahead to lose them, but it seemed the danger was still very real. Takota's gaze turned to the horizon, his face hardening as he stared into the distance. "We will make it," he said, though there was a weight in his voice that she hadn't heard before. He spoke as if he had seen things far worse than this, things that had tested him beyond his limits. It was a strength that came from experience, from survival. And as much as she wanted to believe him, the woman couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her own heart. They were both running from something, and she wasn't sure how long either of them could keep up the chase. As the fire flickered and the night deepened, she tried to quiet her mind. She had been through so much already, and yet, in this moment, the fear of what lay ahead felt more suffocating than the dangers of the past. She was no longer just running from the hunters. She was running from a future that was uncertain, from a life she no longer recognized. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her like a heavy cloak, but Takota was there, and that gave her some semblance of peace. She could rely on him. For now. Takota stood up and walked a few paces away from the fire, his gaze moving over the trees, always alert. The woman sat in silence, staring into the flames. The quiet was almost unbearable, and yet it was all they had. She longed for the life she had lost, for the safety and simplicity of the world before everything had changed. But she knew that world was gone. There was no going back. Takota returned to the fire, kneeling beside her. His face was unreadable, but his presence was steady. "We will be ready," he said again. His voice was a promise, and in that moment, it was all she had to hold on to. She nodded, though the weight of the uncertainty still lingered in her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. He didn't respond, but she didn't expect him to. He was a man of few words, but in the silence between them, there was an understanding. Takoda was doing everything in his power to keep her safe, and for now, that was enough. As the fire crackled and the night pressed in around them, they both prepared for what would come. There was no turning back now. The hunt was closing in, but they would fight. They would survive. And in the morning, they would keep moving towards whatever future lay ahead. The next morning came quickly, with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy above. Takoda was already awake, his posture rigid as he scanned the surrounding woods, ever watchful. The woman, though weary, knew they couldn't afford to rest any longer. The hunters were closing in, and the further they moved, the more desperate their pursuit would become. She could feel it in her bones. Their steps were fast approaching, and there was no safe place until they reached the hidden sanctuary Takoda had promised. They had to keep moving. Takoda's face was unreadable, his usual calm demeanor unwavering, but the woman could sense the underlying tension in him. She had learned that he was a man of few words, but those words carried weight, and his actions spoke louder than anything he could say. "We leave now," Takoda said simply, breaking the silence of the morning. The woman nodded, her stomach heavy with both fear and anticipation. She had no idea what awaited them at their destination, but it was the only hope she had. She had no other choice but to trust Takoda. They packed quickly, moving in silence as the urgency of the situation tightened around them. Takoda led the way, his steps sure and steady, while the woman followed closely behind, her eyes darting from one shadow to the next, always alert. They moved through the forest as quietly as possible, each step measured, each breath taken with care. The woods, once familiar to the woman, now felt foreign, as though they were both intruders in a place that held no comfort. Takoda stopped every few minutes, scanning their surroundings before signaling for her to continue. The woman could feel her anxiety growing, the thought of the hunters lurking just behind them a constant weight on her chest. She had no way of knowing if they were still in pursuit, but she knew Takoda wouldn't lead her into danger. He had a sense about these things, a way of knowing when they were being watched. Hours passed, and the forest grew denser. The woman could feel the air thickening, the weight of the trees above them making the world feel smaller and more enclosed. Takoda didn't speak as they walked, his attention fully on the trail ahead. But the woman could sense his readiness, his alertness. He was waiting for something. She could see it in the way he moved, in the way he calculated each step. Suddenly, Takoda stopped, his body going still as he crouched low to the ground. The woman froze, her heart pounding. She didn't need to ask what was happening. The hunters were near. Takoda motioned for her to stay quiet, and she did, her breath held in her chest as she crouched beside him. She could hear it then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching the dry leaves and twigs. They were getting closer. The woman's mind raced. She had no idea how they had found them so quickly, but she knew this was it. Takoda's hand was on her arm now, steady and reassuring, as he pulled her closer into the shadows. He didn't speak, but his eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, she understood. They had no choice but to fight. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were almost upon them. The woman's pulse raced as the fear she had been holding in finally broke through. Her hands clenched into fists, ready for whatever would come next. But then, Takoda made his move. With a fluid motion, he rose to his feet and silently moved toward the hunters, his movements quick but precise. The woman watched in awe, her heart in her throat, as Takoda blended seamlessly into the shadows, his presence almost undetectable. She couldn't see him anymore, but she knew he was there, waiting. The hunters passed by, unaware of the danger that was lurking just feet away from them. The woman held her breath as the figures moved past them, their voices low and gruff as they talked among themselves. They were too focused on their search to notice Takoda, who was now behind them, moving with the quiet skill of a predator. The woman stayed still, every muscle in her body tense, every sense heightened. She could hear the hunters' voices fading, growing quieter with every step. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the silence returned. Takoda reappeared from the shadows, his movements silent but purposeful. He gave her a brief nod, signaling that it was safe to move. They had escaped, at least for now. Takoda didn't waste any time. He motioned for the woman to follow, and they continued on their way, moving even faster now. The woman could feel her legs burning from the effort, but she kept up with Takoda, not daring to fall behind. They moved swiftly through the forest, their bodies weaving in and out of the trees with practiced ease. The woman's mind raced as they ran, her thoughts spinning. She had seen Takoda in action, had seen his skill in the face of danger, but this close call had shaken her more than she cared to admit. It was a reminder of just how much was at stake. They had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, and trust that Takoda's instincts would lead them to safety. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time since this chase began, she felt a flicker of hope. Takoda would keep her safe, and together, they would survive. The hours passed quickly as Takoda and the woman continued their trek through the dense forest. Despite their close encounter with the hunters, Takoda moved with an unwavering sense of purpose, guiding her through the tangled wilderness with ease. The woman, though exhausted and drained from the constant tension, forced herself to keep pace. Every time they stopped, Takoda would scan the area, making sure there was no sign of pursuit, no danger lurking in the shadows. Her legs burned from the effort, and her mind kept returning to the fear that had gripped her chest ever since she had been forced to flee. Every snap of a twig, every rustling leaf, made her jump, her heart racing. Yet, Takoda remained as calm as ever. He was the calm center in this whirlwind of uncertainty, and she found herself clinging to that steadiness. As the day stretched into afternoon, they finally reached a small clearing. The trees around them opened up to reveal a low hill, the land more open and exposed than what they had crossed so far. Takoda stopped and turned to her, his eyes sharp as ever. "We stay here for the night," he said. His tone was firm, but not harsh. The woman nodded, though her gut tightened at the thought of being exposed. It was hard to shake the feeling that the hunters were still close, still out there searching for her. But she knew Takoda had his reasons. He would never put them in danger unless he had to. As they set up camp, Takoda built a small fire, careful to keep it contained so it wouldn't draw unwanted attention. The woman sat down nearby, wrapping her arms around her knees, feeling the weariness of the journey settle into her bones. She had always imagined her life would be simple: work the land, tend to her small home, and live peacefully. But now, that life seemed so far away, a distant memory she could barely touch. The life she had known was gone, and she wasn't sure what would replace it. She looked over at Takoda, who was tending to the fire, his face half-shadowed in the flickering light. He seemed so sure, so capable, as if he had faced dangers like this countless times before. He wasn't just a man of the land, but a protector. The woman felt the weight of that, and a strange sense of gratitude washed over her. Takoda had given her something she hadn't known she needed: hope. A hope that, maybe, she could survive this, that she could outrun the danger. Takoda turned toward her, catching her gaze for a moment before he spoke. "You rest," he said. "I will keep watch." She opened her mouth to protest, to insist that they take turns, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't asking, he was telling her. She knew he would stay up, that he would protect her, no matter the cost. She didn't want to be a burden, but the weariness in her body won out. She nodded, settling into a position where she could rest her head against a rock, the warmth of the fire lulling her into a lighter sleep. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to give her body some relief. The sounds of the forest drifted around her, whispers of the wind, distant, animal calls, and the crackling of the fire. Takoda remained still beside her, his eyes scanning the shadows, listening for any movement. She knew he wasn't sleeping, and she was grateful for that. Hours passed, and the sky above them darkened to a deep blue, the stars emerging one by one, their cold light casting long shadows over the forest floor. The woman's thoughts wandered again, back to the life she had left behind. She wondered if her family was safe, if the hunters had found the remnants of their home. She hadn't been able to say goodbye to anyone, hadn't had a chance to explain what was happening or why she had to leave. Her heart ached at the thought of them, her parents, her friends, But there was nothing she could do now. Her only focus had to be surviving. And yet, as she lay there, listening to the quiet murmur of the night, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from knowing everything was fine, but the kind that came from knowing they were safe, at least for now. Dakota was keeping watch. He had promised to protect her, and for the first time since she had started running, she believed him. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the night settle around her, and allowed herself to rest. Dakota's steady presence beside her, the warmth of the fire, and the gentle sounds of the forest calmed her fears, even if only for a short while. But in the back of her mind, she knew the danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The hunters weren't far behind, and they would be relentless. But as long as she had Dakota by her side, she felt a flicker of hope. He had made a promise, and she trusted him. She would survive this. They both would. The morning arrived far too quickly, its light slicing through the trees like a blade, bringing with it a harsh reminder that time was slipping away. Dakota was already awake, his silhouette cast against the fading night, eyes sharp as he scanned their surroundings. The woman woke to find him staring into the distance, his posture alert and unwavering. Her body ached from the long hours of travel and the ever-present tension, but there was no time for rest. The hunters were still out there, and they were closing in. She had to push through the exhaustion. Dakota moved without a word, gathering their things with the same quiet precision he had shown from the very beginning. The woman followed him, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, her mind racing. The sanctuary he had promised her felt more distant with each passing step. It was hard to believe that it was real. She didn't know what kind of place it would be, only that it was supposed to be hidden, a place where they could be safe. But the reality of their situation weighed heavily on her. Every rustling branch, every distant animal call made her jump, as though the world itself was conspiring against their escape. Dakota, on the other hand, remained stoic. He was always a step ahead, moving with purpose, scanning the environment. His presence was calming, but it also reminded her of just how much danger they were in. As the day wore on, the air grew heavier, thick with the feeling of impending conflict. They walked in silence, the only sounds being the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet and the occasional snap of a twig. Dakota led the way, his body constantly in motion, checking the terrain and listening for anything that might indicate they were being tracked. The woman struggled to keep up, her legs aching from the constant strain. She thought of the life she had left behind, of the home she would never return to. It seemed so far away now, as if it belonged to another person, someone she had been before the chase began. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, or what she was even fighting for. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, that survival was the only thing that mattered now. Dakota stopped suddenly, crouching low to the ground. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, and the woman instinctively dropped to the ground beside him. She held her breath, waiting. Dakota motioned for her to stay still, and she obeyed without question. He was waiting for something, listening, sensing. They were close. The woman could feel it in the air, thick with tension. Her heart beat faster, each second stretching into eternity. Then, she heard it, a faint rustling, like someone moving through the underbrush. The sound of pursuit. The hunters. Dakota's grip on his weapon tightened, his focus unwavering. He signaled for the woman to stay hidden, then moved like a shadow through the trees, his body blending with the environment. The woman stayed behind, her breath shallow as she waited, every muscle tensed. The hunters were dangerously close, their voices faint but unmistakable. She knew they would be found unless Dakota did something. He had no choice but to confront them. Her heart raced as she heard Dakota's movement, a soft thud of footsteps against the earth, moving closer to the hunters. He was close now, close enough to act. She held her breath, praying that he would be able to handle this. She had seen him fight before, but this felt different. This time, they couldn't afford to fail. The minutes stretched on, the only sound being the distant chatter of the hunters, unaware of the danger, just a few feet away. Dakota moved with a swift, fluid motion, slipping past the trees like a shadow. The woman's eyes followed him, her heart beating so loud she was sure they could hear it. The rustling grew louder, then stopped abruptly. The woman strained to hear what was happening, but she could see nothing. Was Dakota confronting them? What was going on? Then, With a sharp movement, Takoda appeared again, emerging from the shadows. He signaled for her to follow, and without a second thought, she rose and ran to him, her legs aching with every step. Takoda's eyes were narrowed, his expression unreadable. "We move now," he said, his voice low but urgent. The woman barely had time to respond, only nodding in agreement as she hurried to follow him. They kept their pace steady, moving through the trees with more urgency than before. She could hear the hunters behind them now, their steps growing louder. Takoda didn't look back, but the woman could tell by the way he moved that he was ready to fight if needed. Her mind raced. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to find the sanctuary, wherever it was, soon. Takoda's pace quickened, and so did hers. She felt the pressure of time closing in on them, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she struggled to keep up. But she couldn't stop now. The thought of being caught, of being dragged back to the men who hunted her, was more than she could bear. Takoda stopped abruptly, and the woman nearly ran into him. He turned to her, his eyes scanning the area once more. "We are close," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "Stay close. We can't risk being seen now." The woman nodded, her body tense as they continued moving, now with even more caution. They had to be close. The sanctuary he had promised was within reach, but would it be enough to save them? The hunt was still on, and they were not safe yet. But Takoda had kept his promise so far. She just had to believe he would keep it until the very end. The forest around them seemed to grow thicker as Takoda led the woman deeper into the woods. Every step felt like they were inching closer to something unknown, but Takoda's quiet confidence told her that they were getting close to safety. The woman could feel her heart pounding as she moved through the dense underbrush. Her legs ached, her breath was ragged, and the weight of the past days pressed on her shoulders like an invisible burden. She had been running for so long, and although Takoda had promised her safety, she still didn't know what to expect. The sounds of the hunters had faded, but she knew they hadn't stopped looking for her. The fear of being found, of being dragged back into the hands of the men who wanted her dead, never fully left her. Takoda moved with a quiet purpose, never looking back, but always aware of their surroundings. The woman kept her eyes on him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She trusted him, but the reality of their situation weighed heavily on her. They had to keep moving. They had to make it to wherever Takoda was leading her. The deeper they went, the more the landscape seemed to change. The trees grew older, taller, and the air became thick with the scent of moss and earth. The forest felt ancient, as though it held secrets long forgotten. Takoda stopped once more, his eyes scanning the horizon. He crouched low, his body moving with the fluidity of a predator. The woman mirrored his actions, dropping to the ground beside him, her heart racing. Takoda's eyes darted across the clearing ahead, and for a moment, the woman wondered if they had been found. But then Takoda motioned for her to stay down, his fingers brushing against her arm in a gesture of reassurance. They stayed there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for what seemed like an eternity. The sounds of the forest around them were amplified in the silence. The wind rustled the leaves, and birds chirped faintly in the distance. It felt as though time itself had slowed, the world holding its breath. Takoda's eyes narrowed as he stood up, signaling for the woman to follow. She obeyed, her movements slow and careful as she crept behind him. They moved through the trees, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The woman's mind raced as they continued, trying to make sense of everything. She had been running for days, desperate to escape the men chasing her. But what awaited her at the end of this journey? Could they truly outrun the danger? Could she trust that Takoda's hidden sanctuary would provide the safety she so desperately needed? She wanted to believe it, but doubts still lingered in her heart. Takoda was a warrior. He had skills she couldn't even begin to understand. He was strong, resourceful, and protective. But what if even he couldn't keep them safe? What if the hunters were too relentless, too determined to let them go? They reached a small ridge, the land opening up before them. Takoda stopped again, his eyes scanning the area. The woman looked around, noting the subtle change in the landscape. The trees here were older, their trunks thick with age, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out much of the light. It felt like a place that had been untouched for generations. "We are close now," Takoda said in a low voice. The woman nodded, her breath coming faster as she realized they were nearly there. The hidden sanctuary was within reach. She could feel the weight of the moment. They had made it this far. They couldn't stop now. Dakota led her forward, moving cautiously but steadily. They crossed the ridge, heading toward a cluster of dense trees ahead. The path grew narrower, the underbrush thick with vines and branches. The woman's feet stumbled over the uneven ground, but she kept moving, her determination pushing her forward. Every step brought them closer to safety, and with each passing moment, her hope grew. They reached the heart of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that it was nearly impossible to see the sky. Dakota stopped and turned to her, his eyes sharp but soft with a touch of reassurance. "This is the place," he said. The woman looked around, her heart racing. The dense trees and thick underbrush made it nearly impossible to see anything beyond the immediate surroundings. It was hidden, isolated, and exactly what they needed. Dakota stepped forward, parting the branches of a large tree. Behind it, a small cave entrance appeared, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. It was the sanctuary Dakota had promised. She felt a wave of relief wash over her as she stepped into the small cave. It was cool inside, a stark contrast to the heat of the forest. Dakota moved past her, his movements fluid as he began to set up a small fire in the center of the cave. The woman sank to the ground, exhaustion overwhelming her as she finally allowed herself to relax. They were safe, at least for now. Dakota set up camp quickly, gathering what little wood he could find. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the cave walls. He turned to her, his expression unreadable, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "We rest here," he said. The woman nodded, grateful but still unsure. The hunters would find them eventually. She knew that. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. She leaned back against the cave wall, her eyes closing as the warmth of the fire spread through her. The fear, the uncertainty, the endless running, it all seemed so distant now. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in this moment, with Dakota by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could survive. The cave was cold, its walls damp with the chill of the earth, but for the first time in days, the woman felt a fragile sense of peace settle over her. The fire crackled softly in the center, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. Dakota sat across from her, his face illuminated by the glow, but his expression was unreadable. He was still on high alert, as always. He hadn't let his guard down since the moment they started running, and the woman knew that wouldn't change now. They were safe. For the moment, but she knew better than to believe the danger had passed. The hunters would be close, they would never stop until they found her, and it was only a matter of time before they came. But for now, the woman allowed herself to rest. She leaned against the stone wall, her eyes closing for a moment, trying to push away the exhaustion. The ache in her muscles was relentless, but the comfort of the fire made it bearable. She hadn't realized just how much she missed the warmth of a fire, the simple comfort of something familiar, until now. She opened her eyes and found Dakota watching her, his gaze sharp and intent. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. She could see the weight of his responsibility in the way he carried himself. He had taken her under his protection, and he would not rest until she was safe. She couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to this point. What had brought him to help her when he had nothing to gain? She opened her mouth to ask, but he spoke first, his voice low. "You are safe here, for now." His words were a promise, but they carried a heaviness to them. She could hear the underlying truth in them. Safety was temporary, and they would need to keep moving soon. The woman nodded, trying to push away the doubt that crept into her mind. "How long until we leave?" she asked quietly. Dakota glanced at the entrance of the cave, his eyes narrowing. "We wait until nightfall. Then we move again." He paused, then added, "We cannot stay here long. The hunters are clever, and they will know we are close." The woman bit her lip, thinking about what he had said. How long could they keep running? How long could Dakota protect her? He had already done so much, and yet, every step they took seemed to draw them deeper into danger. She realized then that she was more dependent on him than she had ever imagined. She couldn't protect herself. She couldn't survive without him. She was alive because of his strength, his skill, and his unwavering commitment to keeping her safe. She shifted her position, pulling her knees to her chest, as the weight of her situation hit her all over again. She was a woman on the run, alone in a world that no longer felt like home. Dakota had given her something she hadn't even realized she needed: hope. She had not dared to hope for survival, for safety, for a future. She had been running from death, from loss, from the unknown. But now, with Dakota by her side, the hope that had seemed so distant was within reach. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Dakota," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Why are you helping me? Why are you risking your life for someone you don't even know?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the fire, his fingers absently moving over the hilt of his knife. He was silent for so long that the woman almost thought he wouldn't answer. But then, he spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I owe a debt," he said simply. "To my people, to the land, and to the ones who cannot protect themselves." The woman was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. She knew there was more to his story, more that he wasn't saying. But she could see it in his eyes, the deep well of experience that lay there. He had seen hardship, he had fought battles, and he had lost. There was no doubt in her mind that Dakota was a man of honor, bound by something deeper than just the need for survival. She looked at him, her gratitude overflowing but unsaid. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." Dakota gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You don't have to," he replied. "Surviving is thanks enough." She felt a lump form in her throat at his words, and for a moment, all she could do was look at him. There was a quiet strength in him, a determination to protect that made her feel safe, even in the darkest moments. But she knew the safety was fleeting. Dakota was right. The hunters would come, and when they did, they would be ready. The fire crackled again, and the woman looked at the flames, her mind racing. What would happen next? Could they keep outrunning the danger? And what would the future hold if they made it through this? Dakota had promised her protection, but even he knew that survival wasn't guaranteed. They were not out of the woods yet. The night would bring new challenges, new dangers, but for now, the woman felt something she hadn't in days, a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but she had Dakota by her side, and that was more than she had ever thought possible. As the fire flickered, she closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest, knowing that when the time came, she would be ready. She had no choice. She had to survive, and with Dakota's protection, she just might. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that they could make it. The days that followed were filled with tense silence, the kind that can only exist when danger is imminent but remains just out of sight. Dakota and the woman moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows of the dense forest as they made their way to the hidden sanctuary. The further they traveled, the more the woman could feel the weight of their journey bearing down on her. Her muscles screamed for rest, but she couldn't afford to slow down. The sound of their footsteps was the only sound in the air, muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves beneath their feet. Dakota, ever vigilant, led the way, moving with the ease and precision of someone who had spent his life in the wilderness. The woman followed, her breath coming in short bursts, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the hunter's presence, like an invisible shadow creeping ever closer. They had come so far, but she knew the danger was far from over. She could see it in Dakota's eyes, that unyielding determination to protect her, to get her to safety. But even he couldn't guarantee they wouldn't be caught. The thought weighed heavily on her, but she pushed it down. She had no choice but to trust him. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached the entrance to the sanctuary, a narrow passage between two massive rocks, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through at a time. Dakota motioned for her to follow, then squeezed through first, his form disappearing into the dark opening. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder, but she knew there was no turning back. She stepped into the narrow gap, following Dakota as he led her deeper into the sanctuary. The air inside was cool, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily off the stone walls. The woman's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she could see that the passage widened as they went deeper. After a few more steps, they came to a small cavern, its walls lined with moss and lichen, the floor covered in soft earth. It was a place of refuge, hidden from the outside world. Dakota set down his pack and immediately began to survey their surroundings, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the cave. The woman sank to the ground, finally allowing herself to breathe. The terror that had gripped her for so long began to ebb away, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. They were safe. For now. Dakota turned to her, his face softening for the first time since they had arrived. "We can rest here," he said. His voice was calm, but she could hear the exhaustion in it. She nodded, her body too tired to respond with anything more than a tired sigh. Dakota went about making a small fire, carefully selecting pieces of dry wood, arranging them in a way that would burn quickly without drawing attention. The woman watched him work, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She knew that this was their last chance for a moment of peace before they had to move again. After a while, the fire was crackling softly, the warmth from the flames a welcome relief against the chill of the cave. Dakota sat down beside her, the firelight casting shadows on his face. The woman turned to him, her voice quiet. "How long do you think we can stay here?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dakota looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Not long," he said, his voice low. "The hunters won't give up. They'll track us until they find us." The woman's heart sank, but she nodded in understanding. She had known this moment would come, had known they couldn't stay here forever. But for now, they had a brief respite, and she intended to take it. Dakota's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw the weariness in his eyes. He had been the one to lead them through every step of this journey, to keep her safe, to fight against the odds. He had given her hope when there had been none, and now, in this small, quiet cave, she could see the weight of his burden. She reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. He didn't respond at first, his eyes focused on the fire, the flames dancing in the silence. But then, he turned to her, his expression as steady as ever. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "This is my duty. I protect those who need it." She nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She didn't know how much longer they would have, how much longer they could keep running. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in days, hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Dakota leaned back against the stone wall of the cave, his eyes drifting to the entrance. "We move again at first light," he said, his voice firm, but there was a quiet finality in it. The woman didn't argue. She understood. There was no time to waste. She closed her eyes, listening to the crackling of the fire, the steady rhythm of Dakota's breathing beside her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe they might make it through this. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had come this far. And with Dakota by her side, she believed they could keep going, no matter what. The hunt would continue, but she would not face it alone. She had found a protector, a friend, and perhaps, even in the darkest of times, that was enough to hold on to. In this captivating tale of survival and courage, the journey of two unlikely companions unfolds within the harsh and unforgiving landscapes of the Wild West. In the heart of these Western stories, a woman on the run from dangerous pursuers finds an unexpected protector in a skilled warrior. Together, they navigate treacherous terrain, evading relentless hunters and seeking refuge in a hidden sanctuary. This compelling narrative explores themes of hope, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond forged between two people as they fight to survive in a world where danger lurks at every corner. As the story progresses, the woman learns to trust her protector, a man who has faced countless battles and challenges, yet still carries the weight of his promise to protect her. In the tradition of classic Western stories, the journey is not just physical but emotional, as the woman comes to terms with her new reality and the strength she must find within herself to endure. The pair's relentless pursuit of safety takes them to the very edge of survival, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. In these Western stories, survival is not guaranteed, but courage and determination provide a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. As the woman and her protector find moments of peace in an otherwise hostile world, they realize that the battle for survival is far from over. The hunters are still out there, but with each passing day, they grow closer to their sanctuary, where safety may finally be within reach. In these gripping Western stories, the characters' resolve is tested, and the bonds they form define their fate in ways they never could have imagined. Will they find the sanctuary they desperately seek, Or will the dangers of the Wild West finally catch up with them? Discover the answers in this action-packed tale filled with suspense, heartache, and the enduring spirit of the West.